How's it going, guys? My name is Yadin Bromberg. I'm here today to share a cause that is very near and dear to my heart. And that cause is women's inequality in esports. So today we are going to be looking at how we can break down those barriers. Right off the bat, did you know that women account for 46% of all gamers? Now, when we were going through the discussion boards and talking with one another, a lot of people left remarks to me about, okay, this is a cool metric, but what's the scope like? Could this be 100 people? Could it be 1,000 people? And so here on the right side of the screen, you can see that we've got metrics from this year, 2020, in which PC users, individuals who play games on the computer, have 1.3 billion users worldwide. Console gamers, which is Xbox, PlayStation 4, etc., having 729 million users, with mobile gamers making up 2.6 billion users. So just between PC and mobile, that's 3.9 roughly. We've got about 4.6-ish billion people there. And if you take that metric in a comparison with the worldwide population, that's pretty huge. And so we're going to be looking at esports, and what esports is the competitive world of professional video games. So let me ask you this. If women make up 46% of gamers, and we've got nearly 4 billion gamers, where are all the women in esports? And that's what we're here to talk about. So we're going to frame the esports market. How big is this really? In 2020 alone, we had $1.1 billion of industry revenue, as was published by Newzoo. Newzoo is the leading statistical website for all things esports and gaming. And how I would like to put this into perspective for you is one of the leading games for esports is called Dota 2. And this is a 5v5 multiplayer online battle arena game where people fight each other. But that's not really the important part. What's important are the metrics. Now, every year they have their annual tournament known as the International. And in 2019, TI viewership metrics peaked at 1.96 million concurrent viewers, which is a hefty amount, as we were just talking. If we've got 4 billion, we've got 1.696 million concurrent. And this tournament additionally even had 88 million hours watched. But these metrics are great. But where's the prize money? And the reason why I wanted to mention Dota 2 to you today is because they do something unlike any other game in the industry. They have community funding on top of what they put up to the table. So for the 2019 International Tournament, the prize pool was $34 million. That's a good amount of money. And the top place, as you can see on the right side of your screen, got 14 million alone, 14.5 million just for the first place team. But with all this money in there and all these teams going for this money, not a single pro player in the entire Dota 2 professional scene has a female player. But what do I know about esports? Who am I? I'm just another guy in your writing class. But for you, you're lucky. I've been doing this for 10 years now. I've been working in gaming for 10 years, did gaming for 5, esports for 5, 6-ish almost now. And one of the things that I worked really hard for, and this activation I put on at the TCL Chinese theaters, is I wanted to give the women of esports a spotlight to really share their stories, which normally go unheard. So I put on a live audience, live streamed production talk show where we brought on some of these incredible players, such as Emily, who was the team captain and 5-time world champion for Dignitas. And we're going to talk about Dignitas a bit later, but all you need to know is that they are one of the highest proponents for growing women in esports. Speaking of Dignitas, when we look at supporting the female ecosystem, there's another game like Dota 2, but this is called Counter-Strike. And Counter-Strike is a 5v5 first-person shooter. And while Dota is great, and they've got a lot of money on the table, and they've blown crazy metrics out of the water, Counter-Strike is the go-to for women in esports because they host the most tournaments for them. Prize pools range anywhere from $5,000 to $100,000, But when comparing this to the male profits of 100,000 to 1.4 million, doesn't exactly quite cut it. So how exactly do we close this gap to give women more opportunities? That's where we get to the esports inequality gap. Now, Jordan Sherman, he's the head of partnerships for Gen G, which is another esports organization based out of here in Los Angeles, and they're also a big proponent for women in esports. But he went on to say that no female players were really given the opportunity to come into a professional environment and play competitively as part of an organization. That's one of the biggest issues, because how do we expect women to compete if they're not even getting the opportunities? How does someone expect to get a job if they don't have anything on their resume? So we're going to be taking a look at some of the problems, causes, and solutions facing women's inequality in esports. Now that we've addressed what we're going to look at, let's hop right in. Take a look at what some of these problems might look like. What does the industry say? Now, we love our gaming, but gaming might just not be for everyone. Sejin Kim, I had the pleasure of studying her Masters of Science in Kinesiology thesis paper for this class. And in it, she does a great study where she interviews lots of people from the industry and gets their thoughts on women's inequality. One of her participants, one thing she mentions is how every participant indicated that the primary reason men dominated the esports field was that they had more exposure to video games when they were younger. If you were growing up, you might have seen commercials for the Game Boy SP or the GameCube, the PlayStation, but everything growing up was all targeted around men. If gaming is a men's game, how do we give the women the exposure they deserve? One of the biggest issues that we're going to be looking at later is women's harassment in gaming. Now, harassment in gaming, this has so many different variations, and it can appear in communications, in various sexual innuendos, and other examples. But here on the right side of your screen, we see examples of women in gaming who are speaking out that they find it sexist. They want equality. And as user Dolest says, they try to separate themselves, and they've tried stuff such as creating tournaments, but guys always just knock it down. Another user, Tefez, mentions how it reminds her of the WNBA and the female-only NBA league, which states how girls can't compete with the men, and we're going to be looking into this a bit later. But these are just some examples of the unfair harassment that we're going to be looking at. Now, one of the biggest ways to combat this toxicity among the players is through media training. Esports organizations and teams such as Immortals and Genji believe this is one of the first big steps in making steps forward to having women be included. Now that we've taken a look at some of the problems, we're going to hop right into the causes of what brings all this to the table. One of the biggest things, and if you think of society and history at large, we progress through time, right? And so here we've got a timeline that we're going to be taking a look at, and we're going to be looking at how women and men have kind of moved forward in sport throughout the years, starting with the first Olympics. Now in 76 BC, strength determined lots of things. It determined how valuable you were to society, how successful you would be, and how well you could provide for your family. And so there's this really strong emphasis on being masculine and owning it. When we move forward towards the Victorian era, we had a new type of masculinity, and that was Victorian sport masculinity. And Victorian masculinity could be outlined as an ideology of strength and stoicism. So even though this is 1,100 years in the future, everything about strength is still emphasized the same. But did you know that it was mandatory in English public schools to focus and take classes in sport so that boys could get strong and, as Jobbins quotes, demonstrate their physicality and thus manliness from an early age? But while the men were doing this, meanwhile the women were back at home and they were quilting, sewing, and making dresses. But prior to the Victorian era, pre-Victorian era, women were seen more as an object. And it's very sad because they would be used to entice men at rugby matches, cricket matches, with full displays of their personal charm, if you will, where they would be running up and down, and they would have races with the women not wearing clothing, and that was kind of a way to pull the men in. And so even going back to the Victorian era, toxic masculinity has always been present, not really giving women the time of day. Now, what changed? And here we have it. So the new women after the Victorian era was women wanted to belong to the human race, not the Ladies' Aid Society, the human race. They wanted to have their own impact. They wanted more education, more sport, and more opportunities to live like the men. When looking at the 1950s and 60s, women's equality was still progressing. And at the time, an Equal Rights Amendment was in discussion for the government. And because of this, the Division for Girls and Women in Sport was amended to say that women may compete in collegiate sport. And this was a big deal because prior to this, women didn't have these opportunities. It was only the men who were able to compete on the collegiate level. So with this, new opportunities such as gymnastics, swimming, track and field, badminton, and volleyball became available. But the issue is, when it came to collegiate sport, the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, had a big issue with them coming in to do this. The reason being the NCAA wanted to have a lockdown on all collegiate sport, and they didn't feel that women could compete just like the men. They didn't deserve it. Now in 1971, the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women provided the structure for programs because the NCAA wouldn't. Now the NCAA had this win or die attitude, showing that you just go for the gold, but the AIAW wanted to emphasize participation, giving anyone, any female, the opportunity to play games and play sport if they wanted to. Now, the keystone in really getting women's involvement in society pushed forward through the years came down to Title IX. Title IX is a federal civil rights law within the Education Amendment of 1972, written by the U.S. Representative Patsy Mink. Now, what Title IX states is that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, in paraphrased, be denied the benefits or subjected to discrimination of any educational program receiving funding. So collegiate sport, this basically made it so, okay, if you are getting funding, you can't deny the women these opportunities to play. And so with this, Title IX skyrocketed women's involvement in collegiate sport from 15% in 1972 to 43% in 2001. And with this, many new opportunities opened, but there are still lots of barriers for women. So professional Counter-Strike player Caitlin Rochelle talked about her harassment and how it was a little too much for her. She was a professional player at the time, but as she says, she stopped playing Counter-Strike, CSGO, because it was too much. She won't play it alone, even though it was her second favorite game. She hasn't touched it because verbal harassment was too much, sexual suggestions, communications in game, harassment, death threats, it was all too much, and women shouldn't have to deal with this. It's uncalled for. And this leads us into present day, where on June 21st, 2020, gaming had its own Me Too movement. More than 70 brave women came up and decided to share their stories of how they were abused or in many ways from some of the various leaders in the gaming industry. Now these were ranging from gaming executives, famous content creators, top esports players, and this ranged from sexual harassment, physical harassment, verbal harassment, and it was not a good day. Not for our industry, and everyone kind of came together to really support these women because they shouldn't have to hide and deal with these issues while everyone else is just playing games normally. Everyone deserves the same opportunities. So now that we've discussed the causes of women's inequality in esports, we're going to take a look at some of the solutions. An overview of what we're going to be looking at is what's being done currently in esports, what we as individuals can do better to support the ecosystem, and we'll look at what some others are saying about women's inequality in esports and why it shouldn't be a thing. Now, as I mentioned, we were going to come back to Dignitas, and that is because they are a huge proponent of women in esports. Dignitas unveiled their new initiative, the FEE initiative, FEE standing for female, and what this did is it advanced opportunities for women in gaming. Now, this is accomplished through various town halls, female and co-ed competitions, and complimentary seminars to really give the female gamers of tomorrow the skills so they can deal with the harassment moving forward and be ready. Other things they've done, as you can see on the bottom left, is they created opportunities where some of their pro players would go to universities, such as right here, Kiara, one of their players, is from Hawaii, and so she did this thing where she worked with the University of Hawaii at Manoa to provide coaching for their Valorant tryouts. Here on the right, you can see user Jalen on Discord, Discord being a online communication service. Now this is from the Dignitas the FEE server, and what they did is it gave individuals such as Jalen the opportunity to introduce herself and meet other like-minded female content creators. Right here, she took a break from school in order to pursue this. And so this community of 800 users helps build that camaraderie so they can all work together and connect, because networking is how you do it. But what else is being done? Additionally, we've got tons of new female tournaments. We had the all-women Valorant tournament just a few months ago. Valorant is another game just like Counter-Strike, where you have 2 teams of 5 and you shoot at each other. But why this tournament is such a big deal, thought I was going to skip forward, is that Magical, this brand new team unknown from anywhere, no one knew who they were, but they came through and they actually beat Dignitas at this tournament, taking them to the grand finals to ultimately win $25,000. And the craziest part about this is that they did not lose a single match the entire tournament, which is crazy. If I could compare that to bowling, think of that as what's that? You get a perfect strike every bowl. It's crazy, and it was so crazy that it opened up new doors for them. Now, this performance through this tournament, Magical, they did so well that they caught the attention of Cloud9, which is another one of the biggest teams and esports organizations in the world, based out of Los Angeles. And did you know, you're not going to know, but I'll tell you, that the star player of former Magical, now Cloud9, Jasmine Jazzykins Manankil, is actually only 16 years old. And so this tournament was pushed through the Dignitas FEE Initiative's platform, and they really tried to open opportunities because originally it had an open qualifier, and so they wanted to encourage other women such as Jazzykins the opportunities to perform on such a high caliber level. Additionally, when we look at esports, we can never really make the progress that we want to see unless we have the funding, and that comes in through the ways of sponsorships. New non-endemic sponsors such as NYX Cosmetics and MAC have merged into the esports space, which is great. Back at TwitchCon 2019, I had the pleasure of actually talking with the people at Mac Forbid and kind of picking their brains. But here on the bottom right, we've got one of the Mac leaders, I don't remember his name, but he's with Pokimane. Now, Pokimane is one of the largest female content, she is the largest female content creator in the world, and this partnership with Mac helped bring new non-endemic followers into the gaming space, and it helped bring more feminine opportunities into gaming, so to build kind of a comfort space. We also had NYX Cosmetics partnering with Dignitas to bring some of their cosmetics into Animal Crossing Wild Worlds, which is this great game which at the beginning of the COVID pandemic helped bring lots of people around the world to islands that they would have to communicate with their friends or family who they otherwise would not be able to see because of the pandemic. But what can we do better? Well, we can do better, and these are the suggestions that I would like to propose for how we can do this. And this is done through scouting a wider range of talent and producing more content that is female focused. Just like how Cloud9 found Jazzykins when they weren't looking, that's what we need to do more of. There are so many talented individuals all across the world, even here in the United States and Los Angeles as well, being a hub for esports. And so if organizations such as Cloud9 can take a look at rather than looking for just the top pro players who everyone knows and loves, looking for the underdogs to give them new opportunities and help support them. Additionally, one of my close friends, but not close friends, but people who I work with, XSET, they are this great organization that came up in July. XSET is made up of the former executive team from FaZe Clan. FaZe Clan being the largest esports organization in the world with over 264 million followers worldwide. And this executive team came to start XSET because they wanted to provide new opportunities. They wanted to provide equality and inclusivity for anyone who wanted to rep the set. And they did that. They have already been bringing on tons of new content creators. They just signed a all-female Counter-Strike team. They've brought on talented individuals such as Mina Stress, who is a U.S. Olympic skateboarder. And they are building out their female roster, and they are helping to build this pedestal for women in esports to grow. But others refute this. Others don't exactly think that women can compete on the same stage as men, or that they deserve to be in esports at all. One Reddit user, who I will call XD, said that female CSGO is essentially just marketing. They don't know and they don't care how the team performs. Now, this will make a lot more sense if I tell you about this team, Vevictus Esports. Vevictus Esports was a Russian esports organization which signed a female team of, in easier terms, they were a, let's say, collegiate basketball team. And they got thrown into the professional League of Legends scene, their regional scene, which was equivalent to the WNBA. And it was a big deal because they were the only female team competing against all the male pros. And because of that, they went 0-28 their season. But that was the issue. They were collegiate players playing on the professional level. There was a huge skill cap that wasn't there. And in response to allegations about this marketing stunt, because everyone was calling them out, they were like, oh, you're just bringing on this female team to show that you're equal opportunity. And they actually kind of confirmed that. One of the esports team, Vevictus, said that it's time to experiment, and how they wanted to compete. We would like to check how competitive the women's team will be on the professional stage and how strong their progress will be. But it was more of a laughing stock. They took these incredibly skilled women, who they are really good at the game, but they just threw them in the deep end, and they kind of did it as a marketing stunt to show, hey, we've got female players, and we're the first ones to do it. But it was more of a laughing stock, and some of these matches, which normally can take up to 35-40 minutes, ended up in just 12 or 13. Additionally, there were other companies such as Cranium Apparel, which made this esports dress, a dress for esports which they were never consulting anyone on. They didn't consult any women, and when this dropped, there was lots of backlash within the industry. One Twitter user, Perfexia, mentions how we're playing games, not going to cheer practice, and so there was lots of backlash because people didn't even want this. People were just trying to make apparel that, oh, we're trying to be female friendly esports, yeah, but it was unnecessary and it felt forced because the women are just trying to play games too. But it all comes down to investing in the future. You'll see as soon as a tournament is announced that there's all this roster news, and this organization picked a female team up, or these 5 girls came together. And Rochelle, who we heard from earlier, Caitlin, that this is all things she's talking about and real things. When sponsors ask what tournaments they want to go to, it's the female tournaments, because that's where they can compete on the stage as the men. And so when we look to invest, we can't make the progress without the investment. And so that's when the sponsorships and the funding and all these other puzzle pieces come into play. But now that we've addressed our solutions, let's take a look at our conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, esports is the future of entertainment. It's not going away, and it's just scaling upwards the more and more that we wait. So it's our responsibility to give the women of esports the spotlight that they truly deserve. They're already competing in tournaments. They're already getting millions of followers throughout the world. But how do we give them the opportunities so they don't have to deal with all this harassment? Because why do they need that? Let's give them these opportunities so they can move forward and be successful and push esports into the industry we all want to see it become. Thank you.